Greetings, all our beloved viewers. This is Teacher Bernard. Don't forget to tune into our channel called Mountain Heights and subscribe. Today, our topic is bio. Our subject is biology, and topic is gene nature. Let us begin from the definition. You have been hearing the word gene. Today, we are going to understand what makes up a gene and how the genes came to our life. By definition, a gene, a gene can be defined as the basic unit of inheritance. Inheritance. A gene can be defined as a basic unit of inheritance. In this, I mean every future of an organism is determined primarily at the gene level. For example, the height of an organism is determined by the genes in that organism. For example, you see my skin color and the height. All of these are determined by the genes in the body. Now, parents transfer their genes to their offsprings, and these genes transfer the characteristics of the parents to their offsprings. Now, a gene can also be called an allele. A gene can also be called an allele. By definition, an allele simply means an alternative form of a gene. It means an alternative form, an alternative form, alternative form, an alternative form of a gene. It means an alternative form of a gene. By this I mean, if you have two genes, for example, one is controlling, both of them are controlling height, and one is for tallness. One is for tallness, and the other is for shortness. These are two genes, but both of them, they control the same characteristic, but on different degrees. One is for tall, other is for short. Now, this one becomes an allele of the gene for tallness because it works in an opposite way of the other. Therefore, an allele simply means an alternative form of a gene. If I have a gene for tallness, the opposite gene will be for shortness, and and, uh, and that is called an allele. Now, a gene can be dominant, or recessive. A gene can be dominant or recessive. Now, what is a dominant gene? A dominant gene is that gene that expresses itself even though in an heterozygous state. Whereas recessive gene is that gene that only expresses itself in the phenotype only if it exists in a homozygous state. Right together. I said a dominant gene is that gene that expresses itself in an, in an heterozygous state. Is that gene that expresses itself that expresses that expresses itself that expresses itself that expresses itself in a heterozygous state. That gene that expresses itself in an heterozygous state, whereas a recessive gene is that gene that only that only expresses itself in a homozygous state, in a homozygous homozygous state. Now, we have two terms that are coming up. One is called heterozygous, another that's called homozygous. I repeat myself that a dominant gene is that gene that expresses itself in heterozygous state, whereas a recessive gene is that gene that expresses itself in a homozygous state. Now, we have two terms that are coming in. One is called heterozygous, one is called homozygous. Now, the word hetero means different, whereas the word homo means the same. Now, these genes are located in the loci of the DNA. Now, heterozygous means there are two different genes in the same loci. For example, if I have a and a small a, this is heterozygous because I have both of them are A's, but one is big, other is small. This is what we call heterozygous state. Now, for a dominant gene, you know that there is this small a, it will still express its features in the phenotype of an organism. Now, homozygous simply means the same. This is where we are having the same genes in the loci. For example, if I have a small a and a small a, these are all A's, but they are the same. Therefore, they are homozygous. They are the same genes in the loci. Now, for a recessive gene to appear in the phenotype, its genome must contain similar genes in the loci. Now, we're going to talk about what we call the gene nature. Talk about the gene nature. Talk about the gene nature. The gene nature. Talk about the gene nature. I've been hearing the word gene. We want to know how do genes look like and how do genes appear in our bodies. Now, genes are made up of three basic units. One is called the intron, other is called the exon, another is called the regulatory element. Called the regulatory element. It's called the regulatory element. It's called the regulatory element. Now, an intron simply means that part of a gene that is not involved in decoding, whereas an exon simply means that part of a gene that is involved in encoding, and the third part of a gene is that part of a gene that describes where a gene is going to exert its effect. In other words, an intron simply means the non-decoding part, the non-coding part, the non-coding part of a gene. Non-coding part of a gene, whereas exon simply means the coding part, the coding part of a gene, the coding part of a gene, and the element, like the word regulatory, it is that part of a gene that describes where that gene is going to have its effect. Now, let us take an example. If a child is hungry and he goes to a mother to do what? To ask for money to buy something to eat, and the mother gives her 100. Now, this child goes to the shop and buys biscuit for 80 shillings and keeps the 20 as the balance. Now, you can see that this child used only 80 in buying something to eat. It means on this 100, the child only used 80, and this becomes the exon because it is that part of a gene that was used in the decoding. Now, this balance is the intron, the part that was not used. And the element, that is part of a gene that describes where the gene is going to have its effect. For example, the mother may tell a child, you go to the shop. It means this child has to go to the what? To the shop. And that comes an regulatory element. Let us see the gene origin. Now we want to know where the genes arose from or rise from the gene origin. The gene, the gene origin. It's called the gene of the gene origin. The gene of origin. We want to know where these genes came from. Now, according to the predomio, according to the pre, according to the predomio, according to the predomio Thap theory, according to the predomio Thap and RNA theory. According to the predomio Thap and RNA theory, genes are believed to came to exist for about 4 billion years ago. 4 billion years ago. And these genes came from what we call the organic compounds. In the science believed that in the past years, the world was a mixture of inorganic compounds. That is carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and phosphate, and many others. Now, these elements began to combine together to form what we call the organic compounds. To form what we call the organic compounds. For example, to form what we call the organic compounds under the conditions of lightning and volcano eruption. These lightning and eruption created a conducive environment for these reactions to occur, for these inorganic compounds to combine to form what we call the organic compounds. Now, these organic compounds began to pair up, forming what we call the complex organic compound. What we call the complex organic compound. For example, the organic bases. This we know have the adenine, have the thymine, the guanine, and the cytosine. Now, these are the complex organic compounds. Now, these compounds, they began to pair up. For example, when we began to pair, for example, we know that guanine pairs with what? Pairs with, so we know that adenine pairs with thymine, and guanine goes with cytosine. Now, these bases began to pair up. When they began to pair up, they form what we call the gene codes. These gene codes later form what we call the RNA, and RNA form what we call the DNA. In other words, the genes came from inorganic compounds that join to form what we call the organic compound, the simple ones. Now, this simple one combined to form what we call the complex organic compounds. For example, the bases we know, adenine, the thymine, and the guanine. Now, these bases began to pair up, and when began to pair up, they formed what we call the RNA, and it forms what called the DNA. In other words, genes are just a combination of bases.